I work for the Department of Medical Quality Assurance for Florida Department of Health. We do investigations for medical malpractice, pill mills, pharmacies. We have 13 licensing boards and over 70 professions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in my presentation, but I'm mostly going to talk about my personal experience. I've been through several major health and medical emergency type situations, and it's affected my economic situation, and my economic situation affected the outcome of the health. So I think that's why Mark invited me here. He thought I had kind of a unique perspective on that. I also see the other side of it from the professional point of view, where settlements occur. It affects the access that people have to health care, what doctors are available, what drugs are available, the way the pharmacies interact with their customers. In Florida, you've probably seen headlines, and it's starting to move into Georgia. There's a lot of issues with pill mills, with prescription fraud, drug abuse, organized crime, that type of thing. And that impacts the regular citizens when they go to try to pick up their drugs, and they can't get access to it because there's been so much fraud that the pharmacies are afraid to hand it out. So I'm going to talk a little bit from my personal perspective, the experiences I've been through, and then I'm going to move on to what I see through my job and how it's going to possibly impact you and how you can take control over that, because everybody has a little bit of control over that. So that's what I'm going to end it with. The first experience I'd like to talk about, when I was 20 years old, I got married, bought my first house, had been working at a job for about a year. I decided I was going to remodel the house, and I took a week's vacation off the job. I had just finished my year anniversary at the job. I had just signed up for health insurance, first time in my life. As a kid, I never had health insurance. I never went to the doctor, never had a cavity, never had a stitch, a broken bone, nothing. I was perfectly healthy. I went through sports, went through car wrecks, went through everything. Never had a need for a doctor or a dentist. I think I had my teeth cleaned a time or two, but really didn't see the point in health insurance. But my new wife talked me into it. I'd had health insurance for about a month. I'd probably paid in $200 on the health insurance policy, and decided I was going to remodel my house. I took a week off work. Saturday morning, the first day of the remodel, first thing I wanted to do was clear a utility room. I grabbed a shelf. It has some paints and some paint thinners and some things stacked on it. I went to move it. A can of spray paint fell off, and when it hit the ground, it burst. And in that same room was a hot water heater with a pilot light. The spray paint fumes ignited, the paint thinners ignited, the other paint cans ignited, the hot water heater ignited, the gas line ignited, everything ignited, a huge explosion. So I went from feeling pretty invincible to feeling like the Burning Man. Y'all recognize the Burning Man from Burning Man Festival? I had a bunch of gruesome photos I was going to put there of burnt people, but they didn't look very good. I even had some of myself, but they were ugly, so I thought you'd recognize the Burning Man better. But literally, I ran out of that room on fire. My legs were on fire, my arms were on fire, my hair was on fire, my ears were on fire, ran out of the room. And I spent the next hour or so in an ambulance in the emergency room at the local hospital. The bills for that racked up to about $16,000 for an hour's stay in that hospital. But they couldn't treat me. They had to move me on to a burn unit, which was about 60 miles away. That was a $6,000 or $8,000 ambulance ride from one hospital to the next hospital. And got to that hospital. Immediately they kind of went to work on me, tell you about all of the bad things that can happen with this burn. I had a 80% chance of survival. That was pretty good, but that meant I had a 20% chance of not surviving, so that wasn't too good. They went to work on my legs, went to work on the debridement for the skin. That's a word I'd never heard before. That's a word you don't ever want to learn the hard way. Debridement's not a fun thing to go through. But found out after being there for a day or two, that hospital stay was costing about $8,000 per day, but it was not. That was just the hotel room, basically. That was just the room. I had experts coming in, I had surgeons coming in, I had therapists coming in, had round-the-clock care for nurses. I was going through a lot of medications. So 14 days in that burn unit was about $250,000 with the surgeries and stuff by the time I got out of there. So my health insurance policy that I'd paid in a whopping $300 on had covered right at $300,000 by this point with the 2 ambulance rides, the stay in the burn unit. But then it doesn't end there. With burns, you get a lot of scar tissue. You get a lot of keloid scars. It wants to swell up. So there's compression garments that you wear. I used to call it my Batman suit. So I went from Superman to Burning Man to Batman. But I called it a Batman suit. It had footies, it had gloves, it had everything. It had to be stretched on. And it had to be re-sewn and refitted every week as my swelling changed and stuff. So that suit was about $15,000, and they replaced it every week. As I got better, it became every 2 weeks and then every month. But long story short, over the next year or so, I spent just over $1 million in health insurance coverage. My deductible part of that was probably $2,500, $3,000 out of pocket. It was not very much. And I paid into the insurance $200 or $300 a month, whatever it was at the time. So that 1 month of health insurance coverage changed my life. It was a huge deal at the time. I fast forward to about a year from there. Again, starting to feel good, starting to get back to the gym. And I'll go more in detail a little bit later about how I got better so fast and how I managed my own health care. But a year from them, I'm 21 years old. I'm starting to get a little bit better. Have some stomach pains. I go to the emergency room. They say it's gas. Your white blood cell count's not elevated. You're fine. Take some Gas X, go home. Next day, stomach's starting to distend. Not like this. I was skinny then, but starting to distend a little bit. Not feeling good, but my wife had made some ham and beans the weekend before. She was 18 years old. She wasn't the best cook ever. I figured it was some bad beans or something. I ignored it. I went back the next day, third day, feeling really swollen, really tender, weak, starting to get pale. Go back to the emergency room. They say, well, your white blood cell count's actually lower today than it was the first time you came in. You're fine, go home. So I went home. The next morning, I couldn't move. I couldn't bend over. I could barely breathe. I wasn't feeling good. Go into the emergency room. Had kind of a gruesome little accident in their emergency room, which got their attention. And once I had their attention, they scheduled me for exploratory surgery and found out my appendix had ruptured 3 days earlier. So they removed the appendix. I go through all that. Again, a little over $100,000 in hospital bills that the insurance covered. So here I am at 21 years old. Now I'm going on $1 million and a quarter worth of health care coverage when I thought I was invincible. I thought I was Superman. So that health insurance coverage paid off beyond belief. Just, I can't be a big enough advocate for health insurance coverage from my own experience from back then. But I make a lot of mistakes in my life. I don't always do the right thing. So I stopped having health insurance coverage. I figure, what's the chances of something bad happening to me again? I've already been through this stuff. I didn't have anything for 20 years. Now in 2 years, all this has happened. So I'm going to drop my health insurance coverage. And I did. And I got away with it for about 10 years. Didn't have any health insurance coverage, never went to a doctor, never got sick, never went to the dentist, nothing. That first wife didn't work out all that well. So on to Florida, on to a new wife, and no kids or anything with the first wife. Whole new life in Florida, and she gets pregnant. And when she got pregnant, I'm a little older, a little more mature at this time. I think I'm probably going to need health insurance. I can't afford to pay for a baby cash, and anything could happen. But by that point, I'm feeling back to Supermanish again. I'm in Florida. I've got a new young wife. I've got a new job. I'm feeling pretty good. So I think I'll probably have little Superman babies. They're not going to need anything. But again, the wife thought better of that. She says, you need health insurance coverage. We need to sign up for the health insurance coverage. My family's always had it. I've always had it. I want to have it for the babies. So I do. I signed up for the health insurance coverage in the first month of her pregnancy or so. And the baby comes about a month and a half early. Has to spend a night in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. But we get lucky with him. Everything's good. He was a little bit underweight. He, after a night in the ER, he does good. He gets to go home the next day. Everything's great. Not a big thing. But we keep the health insurance. And she gets pregnant again right away. And not right away, 6 months, 5 months later. My two boys that I have now are about 15 months apart. But we kept the health insurance at her urging, and we've had it ever since then. We haven't taken any breaks since I got away with it for the first 10 years. But the second baby comes, and he comes 3 months early, a little over 3 months early. He's born at 2 pounds, 0 ounces. He spends 3 months in the hospital. He gets transferred to Shands in Gainesville to see one of 3 heart surgeons in the nation that will even attempt to operate on his little heart at his size. He spends above $1 million. So his 3 months in the hospital, his surgeries, 5 months of stuff that went on after that, different complications, seizures, just all the different stuff that happened with him. So from those three major experiences, not counting prescriptions I've had to buy, trips I've gone to Patients First or urgent care or something like that, but I've probably spent $3 million in hospital bills in my life, and that's from a guy who doesn't get sick, doesn't get cavities, doesn't get broken bones, doesn't have health problems normally, except for those big three ones. So I wanted to talk about that first, about I'm here. This is the one that was born 3 months early. They said he'd never walk, he'd never talk, he'd likely live a short life. I'm going to get into his story a little bit later, but this is him playing tennis last summer. The health insurance, the resources to be able to hire the surgeon that flew from Minneapolis to Gainesville to do the heart surgery. I didn't have money. I worked for Tire Kingdom at the time. I was selling tires. It wasn't my resources, but the health insurance, using the resources that were available. Children's Medical Services in Florida is a state agency. It's under the same umbrella that I work for now, which is part of what led me to the career I'm in now. But Children's Medical Services, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security Disability, the FDA, I'll get into his treatment a little later, but the medicines that helped him to get better were not FDA approved. They were available in Europe and Canada. They weren't available in the United States. To import them to the United States cost about $80,000 per injection, and he needed them weekly. So the things that he went through to get from never walking, talking, and probably going to live a short life, when he was a year old, he wasn't rolling over yet or crawling, to playing tennis at age 5. Is a big deal, and I'll talk a little bit about how that went down, because it wasn't just the health insurance. You might think from what I've just said that if you have good health insurance, that's going to make all the difference, if you've got money, if you've got the resources, but really, this is one more good example of somebody who resources helped them beat a deadly disease. I was just looking for photos. I usually don't do my own PowerPoints. I usually have an assistant that does my PowerPoints. She was out sick all week, so this is my first PowerPoint presentation from my own hands. I usually do the speaking, somebody else does the PowerPoints, so you might get interesting photos in here. That's another good example, but there's bad news. Just because you have good health insurance, or just because you're rich, just because you have money, Ted Kennedy didn't beat his cancer. There's a lot of wealthy people, Steve Jobs? Yeah, Steve Jobs. There's a lot of people with a lot of resources who don't beat their illnesses. It's not about the money, it's not even about the health insurance. It's the statistics tell you that it's not those things. There's three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. In the healthcare policy debate, I'm sure you've all seen with Obamacare, I've been in this field now for 15 years, but with Obamacare, everybody's in this field now. So you see the debate on TV every night, you see the debate on the internet, Facebook, Twitter, they debate everywhere these days. You'll see the statistics. The statistics lie. Any statistic can be made to say whatever you want it to say. Any question can be asked to get the correct response. In the investigations that I do, if you ask the right question, you get the right answer. If you ask the wrong question, you get the wrong answer. So it's not about truth or lies, really. The statistics are probably the most misused thing that there is. But the statistics say that having health insurance does not increase your lifespan. White Hispanics in the United States have almost a 3-year longer lifespan than the rest of the country. And they're 4 times less likely to have health insurance. So having health insurance doesn't make the difference. Their diet's not significantly different. It's not about that. It's about, well, one statistic will tell you it's about thigh to waist ratio. I put this in kind of as a joke, although this is a real statistic. Thigh to waist ratio. If you have big thighs and little waist, you're going to live longer. Significantly longer, like up to 10 years longer. If you have big waist and little thighs, you're going to live a lot shorter lifespan. That's a real statistic. The source is down here at the bottom. That's I think it was a UK study that studied life expectancy and thigh size. A lot of it is based in science, is how you carry your fat and the type of fat, but that's not the point of this. But I wanted to put that in to kind of prove that the statistics, I could tell you anything, really. I could tell you that this is what it's all about, but this isn't what it's all about. What it's all about is higher education and higher affluence. It says income level there. Income level is not necessarily the right terminology, but that's the quote from the CDC source. It's about affluence. It's about the resources that you have at your disposal. And that may be cash, like in Steve Jobs' case or Ted Kennedy's case. It may be access to CMS, like what I had with Florida, with the Children's Medical Services. There was an RN there who was able to negotiate with European pharmacies and the FDA and get this drug sent in for me. I didn't have Ted Kennedy money, but I had this RN who was just an expert in her field. So it's about knowledge, it's about affluence, it's about managing your care. It's about being responsible and being involved and knowing what's out there, knowing what's available. And if you don't know, I didn't know who the best heart surgeon for a 2-pound infant was in the country, but I knew how to find out, and I went and found out, and we got him. So wealth begets health. However, from my personal experience, oh, that's too soon. From my personal experience, I think it's backwards of that. I think health begets wealth. I think it goes both ways, and I think that's kind of the point of the whole event here today, is that health begets wealth and wealth begets health. The people who come from affluent families, people where I think I have another source over here. People who come from a family where the head of household, it doesn't have to be the whole family, but the head of household has a bachelor's degree or higher. They're 3 times less likely to be obese. 33% of females that come from a poor household will be obese. Only 11% from households where the head of household has a bachelor's degree or a high income career. With males, the percentage isn't quite as drastic. Life expectancy is 4.4 years longer for the households where the head of household has a bachelor's degree or higher or a high income job. In my opinion, from the things I've gone through myself and the things I see in our investigations at work, the types of doctors who get in trouble, the types of doctors who don't get in trouble, the types of people who sue the doctors, and the types of people who don't sue the doctors but call us instead to have them investigated. It's not really the income level. It's the confidence, the assertiveness, the resourcefulness. The people who end up being wealthy are the same people who end up being healthy. And it's not a cause and effect relationship. It's a responsibility relationship. The people who take control of their own health also take control of their own wealth, and vice versa. So what I see through my job is that the people who utilize the state resources, they call our department and they get us to investigate doctors. They look into the doctors before they get service a lot of times. They see if they've had any complaints before. They see if they've had a lot of lawsuits filed against them. Are the same type of people who are checking into their bank before they choose a bank, and the same type of people that are checking into a company before they choose a career. So this quote comes from the CDC, wealth begets health, but really, I don't think it's a cause and effect relationship. I think the people who make good decisions and are responsible and are assertive and they manage their own care, they're confident in their decisions because they know they've done the research, they have success in both areas, wealth and health. So it's not necessarily a cause and effect situation. The next slide, when I had my burns, I had the 20% chance of not surviving at all. My Achilles tendons were going to shrink up. They weren't going to be as long as they were supposed to be. The scar tissue on the backs of my knees was going to be stiff. It was never going to be flexible so that I could bend my legs the way they were supposed to bend. My ears, when I first got out of there, were something from a cartoon. They were this big. They really looked like the roasted pig ears that you buy in the bag at the convenience stores. It was ridiculous. And they said I'd always walk with a limp if I walked at all. Told me I'd be off work for about 2 years. Told me I'd probably be on disability for some insane amount of time. This was last summer also when we all went out tubing. I don't walk with a limp. I don't have any scar tissue. I've got some. A lot of people think I've wrecked a motorcycle or something. I've got a few scars on my arms, but the reason is not because the surgeon was all that great. The surgeon made some mistakes. I was finding staples underneath skin grafts for 2 years, 3 years. I did a lot of my own surgery at home once I got out of the hospital because I was constantly finding staples that were buried under folds of skin. The skin grafts came way down my knuckles, down onto here, and they kept my hands from moving. So as they bugged me, I'd peel them off or cut them off or whatever. Same with my elbows. An acupuncturist actually healed my elbow 2 years after the surgeries when it wouldn't stop pussing up and stuff like that. I did a lot of research. I looked into how to heal these burns. The burn garments that I was wearing, the compression garments, those were Like I said, they had footies, they had gloves, they had fingers. They were impossible to get anything done in. They were lucky. I was lucky that the people who created those garments, although they got mad the first few times that I cut the fingers out, or the first few times that I cut the thumb out, or the first couple of times that I cut off the waist part and just made it into a leg sleeve, after they gave up on trying to make me do it their way, they started doing it my way, and they started hemming those things, and they started making them without the fingers in them and without the footies in them. And once they got to where they made the stuff that worked for my body and my activity level, the scars started to go away. So had I just listened to their advice, just worn the whole Batman suit, I probably would walk with a limp. I probably wouldn't be going tubing. I probably wouldn't be getting in the sun at all, because that's what they told me, don't get in the sun. Once I started getting into the sun, some of the scars started to go away, but all of the advice from all of the doctors said stay out of the sun, but I wanted to be in the sun, so I ignored that. I managed my care, and I came to them with facts, with resources, with research, and I said, this is why I want to do this. When I was in the burn unit on the 4th or 5th day, I was visited by a physical therapist for the first time. And he was the first one that told me, your Achilles tendons will never be right again. They're not going to stretch out. You're going to be on bed rest for 2 weeks. They're going to shrink up. After they're done shrinking up, I had what was called full thickness burns. Y'all have heard of 1st, 2nd, 3rd degree burns. After that's full thickness burn. It goes, you run out of skin and you get into the fat, muscle tissue, and bone. It's all the way to the bone of my heel, all the way to the bone of my elbows, into the muscle tissues on my hands and thighs. A little bit on my hip, I think, back here, which is where I got my first infection, which was a gangrene infection on my butt, which was kind of scary. I'd only heard about gangrene in old westerns, and it sounded pretty scary. So, but the physical therapist came to me that 4th day in the hospital, and he was the first one to give me the bad news. So you're not going to walk right. We're going to get you to where you can walk. You can get yourself to the restroom, and you can get yourself, and you'll be able to get out of the hospital and go home, but you're not going to walk right. And so I started asking questions. Why? I'd been working out. I'd played sports all through high school. I knew enough about exercise and muscle tissue and tendons, and I thought, well, why? Why? It's only been 4 days. How do you know they're not going to heal right? And he just said, well, from my experience, I've done hundreds of these patients. The time you spend in rehab, the time you spend in therapy, it'll be too late to save your Achilles tendons. So I said, why wait? He didn't understand. He said, what do you mean, why wait? So why wait till I'm out of the hospital? Why wait 2 months from now till I'm home? Why are you scheduling my appointment for fall when we're in early summer right now? Why don't we start right now? And he said, well, what do you think you can do? And I said, I can stretch my calves. I said, don't you have some kind of footboard? You're a physical therapist. Surely there's something you can put on my bed to allow me to stretch my calves out. And he said, no. And I said, well, bring me some towels or something. Tape it up. Don't they make a sock for old ladies where you tape your toe to your knee or something? I've seen stuff in the stores. I know there's something for this. And he said, well, they do make stuff for that. You're right. I said, well, bring it up here. Let's see if it works. So he couldn't find anything, but he came back up with a whole cart full of towels and a whole cart full of athletic tape, the stuff they tape ankles and knees with. And we took a footboard off another bed and put it on the end of my bed. We folded up towels. We taped it and taped it and taped it and taped it so it wouldn't move. And I situated myself in my hospital bed I situated myself in my hospital bed to where my toes were on the towels and my heels were wedged under the towels. And it was uncomfortable as hell. It was not comfortable at all. That skin was pulling. It was brand new skin grafts. Felt like I had duct tape on. Instead of real skin, it felt like I had duct tape. But I wedged it in there, and I would force myself to sleep that way. And by the time I got out of the hospital, it's only been 14 days, my ankles were pretty flexible. I was walking with my knees were bending, my ankles were bending, I was walking normal. I had trouble with the right one for a few months until I learned that there was a staple in the tendon, and I went back to the surgeon. At about the 3rd request, he finally x-rayed that ankle and he found the staple and he removed it, and I walked out of his office with no limp whatsoever, just perfect. That was the only lasting injury, was that stupid staple that was actually where the tendon attaches to the bone, and it was hidden in there. So we got rid of that. The physical therapist learned something from me. I'd never done any physical therapy, but I didn't want to lay there in bed and just wait. It didn't seem like the right thing. I wanted to have more control over my situation. I wasn't happy with just laying there in bed. For those same 14 days in the hospital, I wasn't happy with being drugged up either. I had my choice of painkillers. I could have any pain. It was a dream come true for these pill mills in Florida. They would have given me like a cancer patient. They would have given me anything I wanted. They offered me the morphine pump. They offered me the oxycodone. I don't think they had OxyContin yet then when that happened. But the strongest painkillers they had, but I didn't trust the nurses. I had seen them playing around too much, and I didn't really trust them, and I didn't want to be loopy, and I wasn't allowed to have visitors because it was a sterile ward. So I didn't take the painkillers. I took 1 Percocet each morning before the debriding session because that was insane. But other than that 1 Percocet, and that came first thing in the morning, and from those 14 days in the hospital, there was 4 consecutive days where a nurse came into my room at 7 a.m. and handed me a cup of pills, and I said, "What are these?" And she would say, "These are your meds." "No, these aren't what I took yesterday." "Well, these are your meds. You need to take them." "Well, what are they? Tell me what each pill is. What are these pills?" "Well, aren't you John Smith?" "No, get out of my room." So that happened 4 consecutive mornings. Had I been on the morphine pump, I would have been taking whatever pills came in the room, whatever it was. But I didn't need the morphine pump. I was in a manageable amount of pain. So I didn't take all of the painkillers they offered me. And because of that, I wasn't a victim of the medical errors that occur in a hospital. There are 70,000 deaths per year in the U.S. as a result of medical errors. 7 per day in Florida alone just from prescription errors, not even counting the surgical errors and misfilled medications and that type of thing. Just prescription errors at the pharmacy, 7 deaths per day in Florida, 70,000 per day with all of the combined errors. So if you go into the hospital and you trust your doctor, you trust your nurses, you take the painkillers, you're not in control of your own situation, you're going to be a victim. And if you're in control of your situation, you won't have to walk with a limp. Hopefully. You might have to, but it'll still be a better outcome. What do they call the person that graduates last in their class at medical school? People don't realize that your doctors are average doctors. There's great doctors. There's really bad doctors. The really bad doctors are still doctors. And there's still a need for those. In my office, we get a lot of complaints from people saying, "I went to this doctor's office. I had to wait 3 hours. There were people out the door. He won't listen to me. His nurse was in blue jeans that had holes in them. He didn't wear gloves. There's a dog in the waiting room. There's stains in the ceiling tiles. It's a terrible, terrible doctor's office." Well, it happens to be in an area where nobody else wants to be a doctor. And this may be a very, very bad doctor. He's still better than no doctor at all. So we don't just take those licenses away in a lot of cases. We may issue discipline. We may require training. We may do more thorough office inspections, give the doctor advice. But we don't always just go yank a doctor's license. A bad doctor is better than no doctor at all in some cases. Now in other cases, it's not. You're better off with no doctor at all. If you're one of those 70,000 people who get killed because of an error, you would have been better off not going to the doctor. But if you're in control of your situation, if you know what the doctor is supposed to do or not do, just because he went to medical school doesn't mean, or she went to medical school doesn't mean that they know more than you do about your situation. You know what hurts and doesn't hurt. You know what's normal and not normal. You know how you felt yesterday compared to how you feel today. You know if you had a click or a noise or something develop in a joint that wasn't there before. You know what you went there to get fixed, or you know which medications make you feel a certain way and which ones don't. My wife she has severe pain, and she can take Percocets. They make her feel great. She can't take oxycodones, Vicodins, Oxycontins. They give her all kinds of other reactions. She can't take sulfur antibiotics. And I bet twice a year at least, her doctor, who's been her doctor for years, will still prescribe her a sulfur antibiotic. She can't take those. She'll have a reaction and wind up in the emergency room. They don't read the charts as thorough as they should. They're seeing patient after patient after patient. The healthcare situation in the whole country is changing. It's all about efficiency. The doctor is the highest paid person in the doctor's office. So the more people that doctor sees, the more money that doctor's office makes. They can hire 100 nurses for one doctor. And those nurses can process people in and out, take your blood pressure, do your paperwork, do everything else. The doctor's in and out of your room in 5 minutes. You spend 4 hours in there. You see 3 different nurses. You see the cashiers. You see everybody else. You see that doctor for 5 minutes. But that doctor might see 300 patients that day, and he may charge $300 a piece for those patients. The office is making a lot of money, and that's the situation in healthcare these days. A lot of Medicaid and Medicare requirements require doctors to see a certain amount of patients. So if you want to get on the Medicare or Medicaid or disability contract, you're going to have to see a certain amount of patients. You can't spend an hour with each patient, and I've got a little video about that later on. That's just the situation that it is today. So you know more about your situation than the doctor. If you go armed with research, armed with facts, armed with your recommendation. Before I ever go to the doctor, I know what's wrong with myself, and I know how to fix it. And I go to the doctor with my Google printouts and my symptoms and 13 different blogs of where other people have faced it, and I say, this is what I think's wrong. I'd like your opinion. If it is what's wrong, this is how I want to treat it. Sometimes my doctor says, no, we need to treat it this way, and here's why. And I say, okay, you're the expert, let's do that. Or sometimes he says, yeah, that sounds good, let's try it. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. Sometimes he says, no, that's not what's wrong with you. This is what's wrong with you. And then we have a discussion, and one of us changes our mind. But it's always an informed decision. It's never me going to the doctor doing whatever he wants on me as a guinea pig. That doesn't happen. And that's the way to get good health care. That's how you have to do it. Unfortunately, that's the only way you're going to get good health care. There's not very many doctors these days who are going to do it differently than that. Or, I mean, there's not very many doctors who are going to do that on their own. They're not going to just invite you in to spend 30 minutes getting to know you, your situation, your family history. How did you feel last year? What's changed over the last few years? There's just very, very few doctors who are going to handle healthcare that way. So you can't expect that. You have to go in armed with your own information. Back to the life expectancy, the gap is widening. There's a lot more discrepancy now between the affluent and the not affluent, or the people with health insurance coverage and the people without health insurance coverage, or the informed patient versus the uninformed patient. There's statistics to support every possible variation of that. Maybe it's their income, maybe it's their health insurance, maybe it's their education level, maybe it's just their level of responsibility. What do they go armed with their doctor with? But the fact is that the people who get the good health care are living a lot longer than the people who don't get the good health care. And it's getting worse year by year. The statistics are changing to where the people who get the good health care are living even longer than the people who get the bad health care, who are living even shorter. You might have heard, but life expectancy in the U.S. for the first time in the industrialized history has dropped 2 consecutive years. I think we made it up to 78.4, now we're back down to 77.6, but the richest, most well-developed healthcare system in the world is losing life expectancy. We don't even rank in the top 30. I think we're 45th or something for life expectancy in the world. A lot of it is certain demographics. A lot of it is the, infant deaths. We have a high infant mortality rate. That may be due to fertility drugs. It may be due to multiple births, things like that. But the fact is that some people are getting great health care and some aren't. And the only thing that you have control over is your own situation. You can force the issue and make sure you're one of the ones who do get. And we go back to the health begets wealth. If you're one of the ones who force the situation and you get the good health care, there's a correlation with that and your overall financial well-being later in life. So this is a video of the situation of our healthcare. And I'm not anti-healthcare in the United States. We have an extremely good system if you know how to work it. If you don't know how to work it, we have an extremely poor system. This video is gonna, oops. This is actually a trailer for a movie, and I think the movie's out on YouTube, but it's only about 2.5 minutes. I didn't want to show you the whole movie. Is there sound?
The American healthcare system is badly broken. The present system doesn't work, and it's going to take us down. We need a whole new kind of medicine.
We're in the grip of a very big industry, and it doesn't want to stop.
If I spend 5 minutes with you and then put in one of these stents, I would get paid $15. For me to spend 45 minutes with a patient and figure out what their true problem is, I would get paid $15. It's a completely irrational system.
We don't have a healthcare system in this country. We have a disease management system where someone almost crosses money in every single country by our lifespan isn't even in the top 20.
30,000 Medicare recipients die each year from care they didn't need.
That's the equivalent of...
That's actually 70,000 if you include pharmacy errors and all the other errors associated with it.
The administration pays you based on how many patients you see. Alright, so who's next? You try and buck the system, someone says, what can we do to get your productivity up. I'm not interested in getting my productivity up. I'm interested in helping patients.
You're seeing the military just being a microcosm of the problems society's having.
Soldiers' use of prescription drugs has tripled in the past 5 years.
Medications I was on.
Only by accepting that the American healthcare system is badly broken will we be able to seek out the escape fires and potential solutions. There are answers.
One company has figured out how to lower healthcare costs by more than 40%.
We provide incentives for people to engage in healthier behaviors.
The Army Surgeon General directed to establish the Pain Management Task Force to take a look at alternatives to narcotics.
I was skeptical, so skeptical.
I've gotten a lot of inspiration, a different perspective. There's a different way of doing things that is possible.
If I think about what healthcare could be like, it would have a lot more care in it.
The healthcare system is unsustainable. 4 million workers in the future. Not just the health of healthcare, but the health of the nation.
Now, I don't entirely agree with that video. The healthcare system has issues. It's not broken. A lot of what's broken is the American public. A lot of what's broken is people. Mark, my brother, has a friend who loves logical fallacies. How many people have had philosophy classes and know about logical fallacies? Appeal to authority. The doctor said this. Well, which doctor? What did he say? Who did he say it to? Why did he say it? What was that situation like? The doctor, unless you've been to the doctor and they know your whole history and they know your whole situation and they know what recent changes have taken place, that appeal to authority is a logical fallacy. You can't say the doctor said. My friend went to the doctor and they said this. My friend went and they got this drug. I can't do this because the doctor didn't tell me. I didn't mention it earlier for my son, but when my son was going through the one that was born 3 months early, when he was born, when we got the good surgeon in Gainesville, we got the good neurologist in Gainesville, we were driving to Gainesville from Tallahassee about 3 hours every week, every Monday. And they would have to take either blood or spinal fluid or both. And he was still a little 3 to 5 pound baby during that time. He started to grow. But taking spinal fluid or blood from a baby that size with translucent skin and veins and arteries that are hair thin, literally human hair size, that they're trying to get a needle into to draw blood. And I would have to hold him. I'd have to cradle him in the fetal position so they could get between the vertebrae, or I'd have to hold him down and make sure he didn't move 1/4 of a millimeter because they had to get in that little vein in his foot or that little vein in his forehead. And there was a lot of days I'd cry worse than he would. It was ridiculous what we had to go through, but that's what it took to get him well. There was other days where I couldn't take it and I said, stop. And the nurses, the doctors, we have to do it. No, I don't care. I know what's best for my son today, and this isn't it. We've tried for 20 minutes. We're not going to torture him anymore. It's a quality of life. We're here for him to get better. He's not getting better today. He's getting worse. We're going to leave. It's assertiveness. It's confidence in you knowing what's best for yourself or you knowing what's best for your child. Sometimes those nurses would get downright mad. But we were back there the next week, and they were drawing blood again, and he was getting his medicines adjusted, and he was getting his occupational therapy. We forced the issue to where he had the drugs from Europe, he had an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a home health nurse. His mother and I went to classes to learn to do the occupational therapy. So every day of the week, he was getting either exercise from us, a visit with the doctor, a visit in our home from some type of therapist, a visit from a nurse. He had trouble with his brain developing. It was causing seizures. It's a condition called infantile spasms. If you ever want to leave here and Google it, the prognosis was really, really poor. And my wife went to a couple of funerals of babies who had the same prognosis, who went to the same first doctor that we went to, who we did not accept that care, and we went on to another doctor. And that first doctor that we went to, a couple of those babies died, and my wife went to the funerals, and our baby was getting better because we switched to a different doctor. And even that different doctor we disagreed with from time to time, as sometimes we did it his way and sometimes he did it our way, but we were there. And the healthcare system is not broken. The healthcare system has major issues. So does Canada's healthcare system, so does France's healthcare system, so does I have a friend from Bahrain. He lives over in Jacksonville. He flies back to Bahrain for any healthcare issue. He doesn't trust any U.S. doctors. But last time he did this, he got a knee replacement surgery, which was his second knee replacement surgery, and he wound up with an infection, and he wound up with a second and a third and a fourth surgery on the same knee. Nowhere is perfect. Every place has issues. A lot of what I deal with in my investigations are known risks associated with surgeries. A lot of times, I had a woman this week who had an eye surgery, and she wound up with a hole in her retina. It's rare. 95% of the surgeries are successful. That means 5% are not successful. It just happens from time to time. Maybe something different with her situation. Maybe her age, or maybe it was her blood pressure, or maybe it was just pure chance. A little piece of bacteria or something got in there and didn't develop, but just caused a hiccup in the process of healing. There's going to be issues. I love that video because it points out what's wrong with our system, and those things are definitely wrong with our system. Just about everything they mentioned in that video is a real concern that I deal with every day in my profession. But it doesn't mean the system's broken. It means we need to be more responsible for how we utilize the system we have. One other place we can be more responsible is healthcare fraud. I mentioned earlier the problem getting pain medications in Florida. I probably take a dozen calls per day of crying, pitiful people who can't get, they've been on pain medicines for 10 years, 20 years. Some of them are vets, like the one they showed there with the bags of pills. Some of them are addicted to the drugs and they don't want a better solution. They like the drugs. But some of them, the only way they function, they have jobs. They get up and they go to work. There's one guy in particular I know who's a welder with major back pains. And he's been a welder, and he's been functioning as a welder using pain medications and going to work every day. He's not on disability, he's not on workers' comp, anything like that. He wants to be a productive member, but he can only do it on some heavy narcotics. And his job's, he's lucky enough that his job realizes, he can perform on this much medication, but, not more. They don't want him killing himself in there. But now, no pharmacy in his area will fill his prescription because there's been so much prescription fraud. The pill mills, the pillbillies. I don't know if any of you all watch Justified. It's Justified, when the first or second season of it, they were constantly taking busloads of pillbillies down to Florida to fill all these pain medications and take them back to Tennessee or Kentucky or wherever they are and sell them on the street. A busload of people is worth $300,000 or $400,000. If each one of them gets 180 OxyContins and 180 Vicodins, and they go back up there and sell them for $10, $15 a piece, and they can fit 70 people on a bus, it's a huge. These organized criminals are giving the patients $300 or $400. They're giving them a discount on their drug. They'll pay for their drugs. They'll find people who are hooked, and they'll say, hey, if you'll go down to Florida, you'll go see a pill mill, you'll get all your drugs, we'll pay for yours. You can keep yours, but you give half back to us. And then they sell those on the street. That's making it really, really hard for the legitimate people to get the drugs. In addition, there's people who take advantage of the system. This is an article, which was, I think, an editorial type article, which was kind of tongue-in-cheek. But I've personally seen a case where a woman went into a doctor's office. She fell down. She slipped on ice or water, fell down, caught herself on her wrist, and then her wrists got sore. She went to see the doctor. The doctor manipulated the wrist around, said it's probably a hairline fracture, which is pretty rare in a wrist. You get compression type fractures, you get tendinitis, you get sometimes you'll crush a bone, you'll need pins, but a hairline fracture is kind of an odd thing to get in a wrist. He didn't x-ray it. He said it's probably a hairline fracture. You need to go to CVS, you need to go to Walgreens, get a couple of braces. I'll give you a prescription for the good ibuprofen, the 800 milligram. You don't have to take the over-the-counter stuff, you can get the good stuff. She got the bill from her insurance company. Who has health insurance in here and who doesn't? When you get those bills, if you use a doctor or a clinic or Patients First or urgent care or something, and you get those bills in the mail that they paid the bill for you, how many of you review it to see if it matches what happened to you when you went? You do? Most people don't. They pay their $15 copay. They don't care what the insurance company pays. It doesn't matter to them. They paid their $15. If they've got a $100 deductible, they pay their $100 deductible. Whatever the insurance company pays after that, nobody cares. This woman reviewed hers. It was $16,000 for her 5 minutes with that doctor so that he could give her some ibuprofen and tell her to go CVS and buy a splint. He filed with the insurance company 2 wrist manipulations, set the bones, 2 medical devices to immobilize her wrist, x-rays, follow-up care, training for her for how to properly use the braces that he supposedly sold her. He billed our insurance company $16,000 for that 5 minutes. That's the type of thing we investigate, and we love to have a witness and, a patient, a victim. When we have a victim and we have billing statements and it's an open and shut case for us, we love those types of things. If it had been Medicaid instead of insurance, it would have been a federal crime and he would have done federal time. And they are really, really quick to give 20 years to these doctors for Medicaid fraud. But if you're not reviewing those bills, you're allowing them to take advantage of the system. And then when we complain about how much health insurance costs, how much of it's our own responsibility? How many times have we allowed a doctor to get away with this? Or how dishonest is our doctor and we don't even know it? We're going to him and trusting him with our healths and our body, our life. And we don't know if he's honest or not because we're not reviewing those bills to see if he's bilking the insurance company or bilking Medicaid. We're not looking at his profile on the internet. There's a lot of these med rating places on the internet now. In Florida, we have a doctor's profile. You can go on there, see if they've ever had a lawsuit and how much did they settle it for, if they've ever been disciplined by the department, if they've got a letter of guidance, if they're not allowed to do certain types of surgeries. You'd be surprised how many doctors are not allowed to see a female patient without another female in the room. A lot. They still do it because nobody knows, nobody tells them. They hire the nurse who knew at the time that they got in trouble winds up going to a different doctor's office. They hire a new nurse. They don't know anything about the history. The patients that are coming in don't know anything about the history. It's right there on the internet, and that doctor's in violation of a board order. They should lose their license for ignoring that board order, but it happens all the time. It happens every day. There's a lot of doctors. There's doctors who snap cell phone pics. There's doctors who dentists who do things with anesthesia and when people are under anesthesia. There's a lot of weird stuff that goes on in the medical field and people aren't aware of it. They don't do their due diligence, but then they want to say the healthcare system is broken. And the healthcare system has major issues, but it's not broken. Sometimes we're broken. Sometimes we don't do what we ought to do. I don't trust anyone. I never trusted anyone before I got into this investigation field, but I really don't trust anyone now that I see what the kind of stuff they get away with. Even the devil was once an angel. The last thing I want to talk about, I've got about 5 or 10 minutes left, is when it comes to personal responsibility, and I think Lauren Sam, if any of you stayed for this earlier with him, a lot of people think eating healthy costs more. It doesn't cost more. When you look at just per calorie, it costs more. There's nobody in this room who's not getting enough calories. There's nobody in the United States who's not getting enough calories. We're the only nation in the world that has fat homeless people. Everyone here is getting plenty of calories. Calorie is not a good indicator of whether food is cheap or expensive. You have to look at the nutrient value and the type of fullness or satisfaction you get from the food. Does this one have the broccoli on it, or is that one I didn't use? A bag of chips, well, a $2 bag of chips, people think is a better deal than a $2 bag of apples. A $2 bag of apples will last you all week. A $2 bag of chips didn't last through this talk. If any of you brought a bag of chips in, it didn't last through this whole talk. Eating healthy doesn't cost more. Fresh foods, fresh vegetables, and that's something that we go back to the affluence and the education. A lot of educated people are not obese. A lot of educated people cook at home. A lot of affluent people cook at home. I don't know if I put the slide in here or not. It may be coming up next. Has anybody read The Millionaire Next Door? Any economy students, economic students, it should be required reading. I've told him this before, he disagrees, but it should be. Let's see if this is the next. Yeah, which one costs more? Mayor Bloomberg from New York wears a $275 pair Cole Haan shoes. He's a billionaire. The Dr. Scholl's from Walmart are $24.99. Who do you think's spending more money on shoes, Bloomberg or the Walmart customer? Walmart. By far, 10 times more. It cost him $50 to resole those shoes about every 10 to 15 years. Every meeting he goes into, he's got Cole Haan shoes. Every place he goes, he's dressed like a billionaire. But he's only spending $50 every 5 to 10 years on those shoes. This Walmart customer is spending $24.99 twice a year, at least once a year, For me, it'd be 3 or 4 times a year. This guy's spending $100 a year on shoes, and that guy's spending $50, $10 a year, $50 every 5 years on shoes. That guy's dressed like a billionaire, and this guy's dressed like a Walmart customer. It's the same with food. Oh, I read this somewhere and I couldn't find the source this time, but how long does a $100 pair of shoes last? Twice as long as the $50 pair, but a $200 pair lasts a lifetime. Eating healthy is just like the shoes. If you go buy a bag of apples, you're going to get a lot of benefits from that bag of apples. If you go buy a bag of chips, you're not going to get a lot of benefits from that bag of chips. You'll get calories, but you won't get nutrients. If you run through and get a double cheeseburger on the way home. Hey, this was on MSN last week. Does anybody know what one of the healthiest meals at McDonald's is? Or low calorie, high protein? For years, they've been advertising it as the salad. MSN just did an article on it a week or two ago. The salads at McDonald's are one of the most unhealthy things on the menu. The McDouble cheeseburger is one of the healthiest things. You get higher protein, less calories. It's only a small amount of bread. You don't get all the stuff that you get. If you put the croutons and the bacon bits and the dressing on the salad, far more bad stuff there for you, far more calories, a lot less protein, a lot less nutrients that your body needs. Lettuce doesn't have many nutrients. Spinach leaves have nutrient, but not lettuce. Don't start a diet that has an expiration date. Focus on a lifestyle that will last forever. With discipline, belief, and the right knowledge, we become the best that we can be. Diets fail. Discipline works. And these are all the different types of things that you can buy. I call this the WIC diet. There was a time in my life whenever I had to use WIC when I was younger, right after those burns, actually. The WIC diet, you can only buy the things on the approved WIC grocery list. You can't go buy, you might be able to buy chips, I don't know. But you got to buy the big block of cheese. You got to buy a lot of pinto beans, a lot of rice, a lot of that type of stuff. You get a lot of food. When I was on the WIC diet, it wasn't really a diet, but when I was on WIC, using WIC to buy my groceries, I filled my cabinets up every month. I couldn't eat all the food that I was buying. I wanted to use those coupons up every month, so I used them up, and I had more food than I could eat. I could spend 3 times that amount on the normal things I was buying and not have any food at the end of the month. I was eating a lot more calories, a lot less nutrients, and spending 3 times the money. If we shop healthy and we eat healthy, we're going to be healthier. And it goes right back to the same responsibility with the economics. The health begets wealth, wealth begets health. If you take responsibility for your actions in your diet, your actions at your doctor's office, your actions with your economics, your actions about making sure your doctor is honest, keeping them honest, reviewing those bills, it's going to have lifetime benefits. If you save $13 a week off of sodas and Red Bulls, that's $3,500 invested in Dave Ramsey's 5% plan. If you just stopped 1 Red Bull a day or 1 Starbucks coffee a day and you replace it with water or brewed tea at home, that $13 becomes $3,500 in 5 years and $105,000 in 40 years when you reach retirement. A little bit of responsibility goes a long way in economics. This isn't what makes affluent people affluent, but it's a piece of it. Just better decisions. Brewed tea instead of Starbucks coffee. Brewed coffee at home. Keeping things honest. That's it.